the absolute pleasure of speaking to the star of the upcoming film, The Subject, Mr. Jason Biggs. How are you today, sir?
Good, Ricky. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. Before we dive into the film, I'd like to ask a good little question for you. What was your first job in the movie industry?
Oh boy, uh, it's a good question. So I started when I was a little kid. So I mean, my first jobs were sort of more modeling. I remember like doing a TV show here in New York called Looking Good with Pat George. I think it was like a might have been a local New York show actually. And I went out and it was like modeling back to school clothes, it was like me and some other kids and it was like televised. So like that was my first, I think my first TV gig. I was 5, I think, or 4. So that was like my first sort of indie industry, I guess. But in it feature film is what you're talking about specifically. I was an extra a ton when I was a kid. So I did, you're not going to believe this. I was an extra in 9.5 Weeks. I was an extra in The Flamingo Kid. I was an extra in Sea of Love with Al Pacino. Random New York City based films that I would come in and be a kid in the background. I did that a bunch when I was younger. That was sort of my first sort of introduction to the movie world.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
You play Phil Waterhouse, in a documentary filmmaker who plays who deals with the aftermath of catching the murder of a black teen on tape. What attracted you to this role?
A lot, really. For starters, it was clearly different for me. This is not something that I usually do. It's not something I often get the opportunity to do. I generally do comedy. I've done drama in the past, but as soon as I read this, I realized that it would be different. It would really require me to dig deep and, sort of access, emotional parts of myself that I had never really had to access before, or certainly not for a role. But I finally felt, for whatever reason, at this age and at this point in my life, this was, of course, like 3 or 4 years ago now, but at that point, I felt like maybe I could do it, that I maybe could get to those places. And so there was that, just from the performance aspect of things. And then I just thought the film asked a lot of really important questions. And I thought it did a good job of asking those questions without, answering them or making, I felt like it really allowed the audience to sort of, come to their own conclusions, or maybe second guess themselves, from what they thought initially. And so, it's interesting because this we shot this, before the Black Lives Matter movement started. So it's really interesting how the timing of this is all sort of played out. But for better or for worse, I think for worse, on the one hand, it tells you that things have things really changed. I mean, this could have been written at any point. This is a story that could unfortunately be told at various points in our in our world here. But yeah, it just it's not often that I'm a part of a project that has something really important to say. I'll be perfectly honest. I love doing comedies, and it's the most fun I have when I'm working, and I think they are incredibly important to the world, right? We need comedies. It is very important. But in terms of projects that really ask questions, Orange is the New Black, for me, that was a really important project. Obviously it shed light on the prison system, specifically the women's prison system. And I thought it had really important messages in that sense. But this is clearly like, one of the more important films and projects I've ever been associated with, simply because of the questions it asks and the things it sheds lights on. So
the movie has I was doing some research on it. The movie has like 3 different cameras going at once, because it's shooting you, but you're also shooting a documentary, and there's a lot going on. What was it like trying to adapt to that?
For me, that was sort of less of a concern. There were definitely days when I was there when I had to ask, oh, so this camera is, sorry, is this the audience's camera? Is this Phil shooting is this the subject's camera? Is it I'm being filmed? The truth was, it didn't necessarily change my performance. I mean, obviously, there are moments when I catch the camera that's filming me. Those are important moments and I have to act accordingly. But for the most part, that was really for Lanny, our director, to sort of figure out and keep track of, right? She needs to shoot the world and she needs to edit it, the way that she wants to reveal it to the larger audience. For me, it was, I knew, sort of each scene, what was needed, and it didn't really matter where it was how it was being filmed.
The second half of the film is when Phil comes face to face with Leslie, the mother of Malcolm. This is a very dialogue heavy, powerful sequences. What was it kind of like getting in that headspace for these scenes?
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, part of it that really helped us along, I think, was we were able to shoot that at the end of our production, right? So obviously filming is not linear. I mean, you're kind of shooting in whatever schedule you can. It's not like a play in that sense, but Lanny was able to save this big third act confrontation for the very end of filming. So in that sense, it was really helpful in that I got to live with this character for a while and actually kind of take this journey with him, so that by the time this confrontation happened, I was emotionally more prepared to do it. But it was a really crazy scene. I mean, we shot it over the course of a couple days, but I had a lot of help. Obviously the script was in amazing shape. It was all there on the page, but Lanny really held my hand through it all. She's incredible at giving notes. I mean, she's incredible at speaking to actors. Like, for a first-time filmmaker, it was almost shocking how good she knew exactly what to say when to get me to make the necessary adjustments in a very real way, and in a way that instilled confidence in me. Because again, going back to the beginning of this conversation, this is not something I'm used to doing, and so my confidence levels are not. I'm scared. I was very scared to do it, and then the other component, of course, is Anjanou Ellis, who was my scene partner there. I mean, she's just absolutely brilliant. And for her, this was an incredibly emotional scene as well, but she was so good at recognizing when I needed a little bit more help, and she was able to give it. She's just so good, and I'm very grateful to her and Lanny and Chiza and everyone that helped me, feel like I could actually do a scene like that.
Malcolm sees a glimmer of hope, and Phil kind of shuts it down. How important is it for us not to withhold the knowledge that we have within us from others?
Yeah, I mean, that moment sort of really says it all, doesn't it? It's, here he is making this film ostensibly to, shed light on a world that we might not know a lot about, to sort of shed light on the disparity that exists in the world, right, between the privileged world and the non-privileged world. And then ultimately, ironically, he maybe perpetuates that divide even more, not just by the sheer fact of making this film, right, but also by that moment in particular where he Malcolm, there's that moment where Malcolm inquires about filmmaking and about maybe his in sort of shares his own aspirations, right, where there's that aspirational moment for Malcolm, and he shoots him down because it doesn't serve necessarily his objective, Phil's objective, and it just ends up perpetuating this divide, right? And it just yeah, it's interesting what, for me, because I'm a big documentary fan, but it raises all kinds of moral questions about the role of the documentary filmmaker, and also what, who has the rights to explore certain, worlds, right? And um, it's just really interesting. Um, ask it a lot of good questions I think this movie asked, and that's part of the appeal for me in doing it.
So what is something you learned about yourself playing in this role?
Well, about myself, I mean, you know, a couple things, right? So there's the just the human component, do I personally, I don't think I've watched a documentary in the same way again as I did before I made this film or before I read this script, really, right? It definitely makes me question, sort of uh, what the filmmaker's objectives really are. It makes me wonder, are there other motives behind this film? It just sort of makes me see documentaries in a new light, frankly. But I think the biggest thing for me is the performance component. I did not think that I could do this sort of thing. And so, and obviously it's, you can come to your own conclusion as to maybe I can't do it, but I felt like I could do it. I didn't think I could do what I ultimately did. And so for me, it was a huge confidence instiller. It was a turning point for me in my career, because now I carry with me a confidence that I can do things that I didn't think I could do. So that for me was just massive.
I just want to thank you for your time today. And for me personally, I was blown away by your performance. I really, truly was. I thought the performance was amazing. The entire film was it because as you said, you kind of look at your body of work and you do a lot of comedy. So it's like, oh, this is Jason Biggs in this very serious role. Let's see what he does. And you did an amazing, amazing job with it.
I appreciate that, Ricky. Thank you so much, man.
And before we go, I just wanted to say one last thing, and we talked about it a little bit, but I just wanted to say thank you. You had a huge impact on my childhood. You really did. You really, like your American Pie movies, it got me through some really tough times in my life. So I just wanted to say thank you for that as well.
That means a lot, man. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, that really means a lot. Thanks, man.